Welcome to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson, Executive Director of the Commonwealth Policy Program. And we have a special edition this week, special guest with Bob Scott. He is the Commonwealth Policy Foundation's Director of Church Outreach. Bob, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's an honor to be here today. Kind of a little bit of a different way we're doing it, but, we're all learning technology these days.
We're learning technology, and we are doing this program about 180 miles apart. You are located just south of Louisville in Simpsonville, Kentucky. I am from my home office in Cadiz, Kentucky, and we're using some wonderful technology that both you and I are still getting to know, which is great.
Yes.
So we're going to roll with this, but we are practicing social distancing and following the governor's stay-at-home order and doing our best to follow that. Bob, we were on a phone call earlier today with a pastor in eastern Kentucky who had shared with us some sad and disappointing news about a person in his community who had traveled out of state, contracted COVID-19, and then they attended a church service shortly after where other congregants were exposed to it, and a number of them contracted it. Just learned this morning that one of those church members died from complications from COVID-19. And on this program, we're going to talk about the church's response to the governmental orders to not meet, especially as here we are in Easter week, one of the most attended services of the year, and one of the most important worship times for the church is Easter. And here we have a no-meat order from Governor Beshear. He's saying, look, large gatherings don't meet, and this includes the churches as well. And I thought that would be helpful to bring you on to talk about how churches can respond to this issue and how we ought to be thinking primarily biblically about this issue as well.
Well, you can almost start out with render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. Yeah. And then that leads into plenty of other scriptures besides that one, plenty. It's more than just one. Yeah. The Lord clearly commands us to obey those who are in authority over us. I don't know. I shake my head when I hear about churches, and thank God they are not many, at least the reports I'm getting back, that are disobeying not only the governor, but really the request of our president as well, to restrict movement. The key word that we've all been hearing over the last several days in particular is mitigation. Yes. If you really want to break it down, what is mitigation? Mitigation is social distancing, to be not come in close contact within 6 feet of someone else, no gatherings of kind. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's good. And so it is a little disheartening when you think of pastoral leaders and ministry leaders that are pushing back and resisting the lead of the governor and of the president. Their intention, by the way, is not to shut down the church. This is not communist China where they're saying you cannot meet. They're saying please don't meet in order to slow the spread of this. And they've done this not just towards churches, but this has been directed towards sporting events, towards concerts. Public schools are out. The universities are out. So churches fall in that category of large gatherings, and it is good for the church community to follow the lead role of our civil authorities. They're put in place for a reason. Governor Beshear, you may not agree with his policies, but he is the leader of Kentucky right now, and we are to follow his lead and to honor his role in our society. We might not agree with everything he's doing, but you know what, Bob? He is our governor. You aren't. I'm not. The pastors aren't. And getting back to that first question I brought up, let's think biblically about this. Well, you had mentioned that it's biblical for us to submit to our leaders. That's what Romans chapter 13 says. Romans 13 says, submit unto the higher authorities, for there's no authority except that which God has established. Hebrews 13:17 tells us that. 2 Timothy, since we're going for passages here, I'm throwing out a number of them. But 2 Timothy 1:7 tells us to pray for kings. And I'm sorry, that's 2 Timothy 2:1 tells us to pray for kings and all those in authority over us. And that same passage that tells us to pray for our leaders also tells us, or the same Bible that tells us to pray for our leaders, tells us to submit to the authorities.
Yes.
And I think, Bob, it can be challenging at times for us to submit. I think all of us are rebels by nature, and we don't want to submit. And but this is for our own good. This is for the health of our communities and the health of the congregations there too.
It really is, Richard. I serve on my children's school board, and I'll be very frank with you. When we started mulling this possibility over, I guess it's now going on 3 weeks ago, there was a lot of talk, within our board as to what we should do, but we, through discussion and then once our governor actually made the decision to call off public school, and he strongly suggested at that time private school as well, for all those scriptures you just cited. I think that was the deciding factor, for us to go along with it initially. Now, as we have walked through this process, we have seen lots of reports, not just again from our governor, but from our president, that mitigation works. It's been shown to work. No, I don't see how anybody can argue that. And let me share a little story. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hey, Bob, if I could just jump in and just share this, just to give some context here. It was reported by health experts doing the daily briefings in the White House that in this country alone, it's anticipated, health experts believe that between 100,000 and 240,000 Americans could die from this. So this is not a drill. This is the real thing, and this is based on certain projections and analytics, and they're trying to save life, and it is a pro-life position. You look at biblical positions, principles, and this is a pro-life thing: to social distance, to not meet in large gatherings, to be mindful of our community members.
And that ties in with, that's under the best of circumstances. In other words, putting the full mitigation policies into effect nationwide. Yeah. Otherwise, they were projecting that the death toll could be over 1 million. And we know, and I know you talk often about the Spanish flu pandemic that happened back in 1918. Yeah. In this country, and our country alone lost 675,000 people.
That's right.
And we were a much smaller country then, and so just really think about the impact of that, and then worldwide it was 50 million people actually passed away as a result of that pandemic. And
that's right.
Going into the archives of my church, I go to Simpsonville Baptist Church in Simpsonville, Kentucky. It was interesting. We were able to actually find notes, and one thing about us Baptists, we're pretty good at taking notes, and besides the potluck dinners and those types of things. But digging deeply into the notes, we saw that my church, again, over 100 years ago, Richard, closed its doors for not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 months. Wow. To help stem the flow, because they figured out that was going to be something that was actually going to help and be of profit, and it did. I think they closed down around the 1st of September and opened up. I think it was around January 1st. So they went a full 4 months, and truthfully, this isn't really that major of a deal, because you were talking earlier about what's happening in other parts of the world as far as persecution is concerned, and it's not like it's China where churches are being bulldozed, or other certain parts of Africa where our brothers and sisters in Christ are literally laying down their lives for,
that's right.
Pronouncing the gospel. All we're asking our governor and all of our our president and the elected officials are asking is just to back off a little bit.
Back off a little bit. Bob, we are just about up to a break for our first segment. I want us to hold that thought of the church being good community members, to submitting to our authorities, and to doing what it can do to help slow the spread of COVID-19. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Commonwealth Matters. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson. Thanks so much for joining us. With me is Bob Scott, the Commonwealth Policy Foundation's Director for Church Outreach. And Bob, we are talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and what the church can do to help slow the spread. Because right now, a couple of things to keep in mind. There is no cure for this. This is a disease that there is no vaccination. There's no cure for it. Once you get it, you're going to deal with it. Doctors can't give you a pill or give you a shot to help you overcome it. What's particularly harmful is that older people are especially vulnerable to it. Many older people or those that have immune-compromised systems will be hit hard. Many people won't be, but a certain percentage of the population will be. And in the first segment, we were talking about biblical principles to help think through this issue. And one of the biblical principles that we didn't touch on was that we ought to love our neighbors as ourselves. There's two great commands that Jesus reminds us in the New Testament. One is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second command is just like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And one of the ways that we can love our neighbor is by practicing social distancing. It's by not exposing people to it. You and I may carry this, and we might not know.
Right.
So we want to keep away from people, keep a distance from people. But the way that the church can love its neighbor and love its neighborhood, if you will, is to hold services online. You had mentioned Simpsonville Baptist Church 100 years ago, 1918, closed its services for 4 months. And that was before Zoom calls and YouTube and Facebook Live, right?
Exactly. Before cell phones, too.
Yeah, cell phones. So, really no technology.
There were no telephones, at that time either. So, yes. I mean, and that's really amazing when you stop and think about it, that they had figured it out back then, that mitigation and separation were going to be two key things to defeat this enemy. And our president has said time and time again, we are in a battle. And make no mistake about it, this is a battle. It's one I'm thoroughly convinced we're going to win. It's not easy because our society, as you were just so eloquently talking about, is so used to being mobile, but that can also make an argument perhaps God is going to use this.
That's my hope, is that we will see God use us. He certainly has our attention. Look, for all practical purposes, our economy has come to a halt. We've seen the stock market lose about a third of its value. We saw unemployment numbers creep to about 10 million people within a 2-week time period. I've not even heard the numbers for this week. It's going to be significantly more. And people aren't allowed to go out. We're not going to sporting events. We're not going to concerts. Schools, graduations have been canceled. And we're all wondering, what do we do? As Americans, we're so busy and we're going this direction and that direction. Well, guess what? Our lives have come to a standstill in many cases, relatively speaking, and God has our full attention. And my prayer, Bob, and we'll talk a little bit about this more in the final segment, my prayer is that God will use this to bring about awakening. And when we say awakening, we're talking about the reality of the living God in somebody's individual life and also in the life of a culture. Because quite frankly, we have lost that reality. We might pay lip service to God and who He is. But as far as living out our lives and living out our faith, for that matter, in the church, we don't live as if there's a living God who is there and present and active. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I want to double back to something about the Spanish flu epidemic. It hit this nation very hard. Just almost 750,000 people were killed here by it. In Kentucky was hit very hard. I was talking to one of my board members recently, and his aunt lost 4 children within a 9-day period, from just a year-old to I think 9-10-year-old kids. 4 children within a 9-day period. This was in the tiny community of Cunningham, Kentucky. It's close to Paducah, but that's a real-life story of how a family was hit hard by the Spanish flu. And I think of the people back then who were alive, and if they knew how deadly that flu was going to be, or potentially how deadly it was going to be, I think that they would have been happy to live with the inconveniences and the economic slowdown of the time, only to have their family members spared from being hit by that disease.
Absolutely.
And
no doubt about it.
And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of people second-guessing the government and questioning the government policies and wondering, should they have done this, or maybe they're going too far. And I would say, until it hits your family, you may not really appreciate what is being done by the government. So we need to honor the government. We should be praying for those in authority, that God gives them wisdom. And we should be praying for ourselves as to what we can do to help stem the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Bob, we've got just a moment here until we're going to go to another break. But when we come back, I'd like us to talk about awakening, how God can use difficult circumstances to bring about awakening. So stick with me, and we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson, and with me is Commonwealth Policy Foundation Church Outreach Director Bob Scott, and we are talking about the church's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Bob, just before the break, we were talking about some things that the church can do, maybe the posture or the attitude that the church should have towards the government. And you had some thoughts. I think that accentuated how serious this is, and maybe some churches that didn't follow the stay-at-home orders.
Yes, unfortunately, I know the LA Times reported a couple days ago there was a church in the state of Washington, and again, in their defense, it was someone at the beginning of this, and this has been a learning process for everyone, but they decided, as a choir, they decided to go ahead and meet, and really didn't practice any social distancing of any grave concern. And unfortunately, as a result of that, not just a couple, but dozens of people became infected because there apparently was at least one person in there that had the virus. And as at the time of the recording of this show, 2 of those members have actually passed away. And then carrying that another step further, which obviously is tragic, our Surgeon General just on this past Sunday predicted that this would be our modern day Pearl Harbor, as far as this week was concerned, this week to next 10 days. Again, really trying to drive the point home that there's going to be unfortunately, a lot of folks are going to pass. And these are people that are currently on respirators that he knows statistically this is going to happen. And honestly, I think he's just trying to prepare our nation for what's about to befall us right now.
So Pearl Harbor saw is a little over 3,000 deaths, I believe, in one day. And that's what the Surgeon General is projecting for this week, is that we may see an additional 3,000 deaths. It's under 10,000 altogether in this country, but we're getting close to the peak. And when we get close to that peak, we're going to see a number of deaths spike. So, Bob, as pro-life people, we ought to be concerned about all of life. The conservative Christian church has been against abortion, which, by the way, the EMW Women's Clinic is still open in Louisville. And they've done, actually, it was over 300 abortions within a 1-month time period. it is still open, and many Christians are pointing out the inconsistency, if not the hypocrisy, that all other elective surgery centers had to be closed. The governor has allowed the EMW Women's Clinic in Louisville to remain open. I think that maybe some ministry leaders are pointing that hypocrisy out, and they're justifying their pushback against the governor's lead in other areas. They're saying, look, he's inconsistent, he's pro-abortion, I don't want to follow his lead in other areas as well. How would you respond to that? What would you have to say to that?
Apples and oranges. I mean, in my mind, I just think that's trying to draw a very strange line from comparative reasons.
Yeah.
Now,
of course, abortion's. I'm sorry to interrupt. Abortion's tragic, and we should.
Yes. Yes.
In my opinion, it shouldn't be. It should not be allowed. But even though the governor might not be consistent on all points, and he might be off on allowing the abortion clinic to remain open, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't follow his lead in other areas.
Right. Well, here's the deal, Richard. The way I see it, there's other issues that we are in disagreement with the governor on. But this is one of those issues that I know you are, and myself, and most of the pastors in our state are fully on board with the mitigation steps that are being taken and being encouraged by not only our governor, but by our president, who has been arguably one of the most pro-life presidents in the history of our nation.
I agree.
And he's pushing, the whole idea of mitigation. So that to me is just, it's a strange line to try to draw. I think that they're somewhat separate issues, because he's off in an area that we disagree with doesn't mean that there aren't some other areas we can find some common ground on,
That's right.
And to me, this is an easy common ground area for all of us to join hands on.
I think so too, and I would say don't use that the fact that EMW is still open as an excuse to resist those social distancing guidelines, and don't use it as an excuse to pick a fight with the government. This is an opportunity for the church to work alongside the government.
Yes. Yeah.
And to cooperate with authorities as they lead and as they work to slow the spread of COVID-19. And that is a pro-life position, by the way, because we're concerned about life that's vulnerable to disease. We're concerned about the elderly that are particularly vulnerable to it. So we want to be pro-life across the spectrum, and we have an opportunity to do so right now, to work alongside with the government.
And you said something about opportunity. I believe, and I firmly believe this can be one of the greatest moments in history of the church in America to really step forward and shine right now, because you realize, Richard, we have over 331 million people in this country. And as much as we want to put faith in our government, guess what? Our federal government and our state government isn't big enough to take care of all the needs in a crisis situation like this. This is a chance. This is a chance for the church and those who know the Lord and love the Lord. You were talking earlier about the whole idea of we're to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love each other. Yeah. This is our chance to do that. It's our great opportunity.
It is a great opportunity. And so one of the things that we got to keep in mind is that the church is not forced to stop preaching the gospel. We are forced to not meet in person.
Yeah.
That's what the government is asking us to do, to stop the in-person meeting.
Yep.
But there's a new opportunity here where enterprising pastors can get out onto social media, right? They can learn how to use Facebook Live. They can learn how to use YouTube. And they can reach a group that's typically not been reached before. The church has not largely been present on social media outlets. And so we've got a great opportunity to do so. And, so I've talked to a few pastors. You and I have both talked to a number of pastors across the state. And they have mentioned to us that they've had greater attendance in these online services. Multiple number more people that have attended the online services than would have come on the Sunday morning service. So Bob, as we approach Easter Sunday, there are opportunities there. Look, people are afraid, they're anxious, they're not sure where their next paycheck's coming from, and this is an opportunity for the church to shine, whether it's sharing their messages on social media and online or ministering in their local communities. So we're praying for awakening.
Yeah.
We're praying that God would use this moment to wake people and to stir their hearts and to move them towards Him.
You know what? Our God is so big, He can do anything. And I'm just going to say it. Romans 8:28 says He works all things, not some, but all things together for the good to those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. His hand is in the midst of this. Make no mistake. This pandemic is going to be coming to an end. Yeah. But right now, we are to be the hands and feet of Jesus right now in this season, Richard. Mm-hmm. It's that simple, you know.
That's
and
good.
Just be used. And I know at my church, and we're not a huge church. We're not a small church. We're not a huge church. They're reaching out to the community. They're doing food drives and, reaching out and touching. Caroline and I went and shared our testimony this past Sunday. It's kind of weird because there really wasn't anybody there, but just... the pastor, and we kept our social distance with him when we did it. But there's just different ways, and you talked about it. God has given us this opportunity to draw closer to our family. My kids are home now studying online, and they had classes online today. It's not the best thing, but they had interaction with their teachers. Just go with the flow, and trust the Lord. And that's the key thing. That's the key takeaway. I really want to just stress more heavily than I ever have stressed anything. Trust in the Lord. Put all of our faith and trust in Him through this season, and He's going to bring us through it.
Amen. Amen. If you remember who we're talking about, this is the God who created the universe, spoke the universe into existence, and He put the sun and the moon and the stars in place. He created everything we see here on the earth, and He sustains it. This is a God who's mighty and powerful, and He's in control. And Bob, He created us to walk with Him. That's why we're created. We're made in His image, and we're made to walk with Him.
Yes.
And at this
Amen,
moment,
brother.
God has our full attention, and He is calling people to turn to Him through this. And my hope is that the church would proclaim that message of hope and that message of healing that we all need to hear. Well, Bob, we are unfortunately out of time. We're going to have to close out this segment of the Commonwealth Matters, but it's good to have you on the program. God bless you, and you have a great day.
Thank you. God bless you too, Richard.
Thank you.